Well, I think somebody had come out from England and was practicing in Hamilton, and he had brought a traction table out with him. And to the best of my knowledge, that was the only one in New Zealand. But the idea was appealing because I could sort of see a rationale for its use. So I went to an engineer in Whangarei and gave him the design, told him what I needed, the ability to apply traction, which I could measure on a scale, and he built it for me, and I got a local leather worker to make a chest harness and a pelvic harness. And the arm that came out under the traction table, under the plinth, when I worked the lever on a rack and pinion, had a hook on it that I could put big scales on. And I hooked the chest harness onto the scale hook, and the pelvic harness was fixed on the bottom of the bed. And you could just wind them up. And generally, depending a bit on the size and bulk of the patient and the condition, but somewhere about 110 pounds on the scales, if I remember rightly, for up to 20 minutes. And it was particularly effective for sciatic neuritis as opposed to disc prolapse. You could tell the difference. Differential diagnosis gradually became the most important thing because GPs didn't go in for it, they left it to you. But because the orthopaedic surgeon was a friend, I had access to x-rays through him. And it was very useful to be able to see them. Even though I was no expert in reading them, the more obvious features were there. And also, on my referral slips that I gave to all the doctors, I had a section for x-rays and medication and concurrent ailments. So the whole thing was covered fairly well. And if somebody came along with a painful shoulder, I fairly soon learnt to tell which tendons were involved, what part of the rotator cuff and that sort of thing, and whether the pain was referred from the cervical spine or not. And it was this sort of thing that our people didn't do a hell of a lot of in those days. I remember talking to a conference in Rotorua, being asked to address it, and I urged them strongly to develop these sort of skills. But otherwise, unless you could do that, you were very largely working in the dark. You didn't feel you knew just what you were doing. Whereas if you could sort of be fairly specific about the differential diagnosis, you had a basis for treatment then. And it made your job so much more satisfying. You felt you were doing something. Another thing I learned to do that was rather interesting was to tear adhesions in shoulder joints without causing pain. Just by immobilizing the scapula with a certain angle, it was quite easy to tear adhesions. No anaesthetic needed. Did a short wave first just to make them nice and warm. Well, if you can imagine the patient's lying on a plinth and I'm behind him and I've got one hand on the border of the scapula and hold that to anchor it and then bring the I'm back in that angle as near as I can tell you. And you'd come up to a certain degree of resistance, and then just a little extra, and you'd hear and feel it rip, and it did not cause pain. That was very useful because you get a lot of cases of capsulitis, and you got them doing all the exercises and all that sort of thing, but you could speed it up like anything, the result, if you could actually free some of the adhesions.